So, let's talk about Venezuela. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most shocking national collapses in recent memory. We're talking about a country that was once swimming in oil money, and we're going to look at how it spiraled into a truly devastating crisis. Let's break down how it all went so wrong. First, let's just start with the human cost, because it's staggering. This number, 7.7 million, that's how many people have been forced to flee Venezuela. It's created one of the largest displacement crises in the entire world, right up there with Syria. And for the people who stayed behind, well, life has become almost unrecognizable. Between 2013 and 2023, living standards just plummeted by 74%. To put that into perspective, economists say that's the biggest economic nosedive ever recorded for a country that wasn't literally in the middle of a war. And, that drop wasn't just some abstract number on a chart. It was felt in the most basic, terrifying way. The economy's freefall meant hyperinflation, a collapse in imports, and that meant things like food and medicine, they just disappeared. This image of empty supermarket shelves, that became the grim, everyday reality for millions. So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did a nation with the largest proven oil reserves in the world end up like this? The story? Well, it's a complicated mess of politics, personality, and some really bad timing with the global economy. To really get this, we have to start with one man, President Hugo Chávez. He was this larger-than-life, charismatic leader, and for a while, his policies actually led to some incredible social progress, but they also planted the seeds for a catastrophic failure. Okay, so this slide really tells the whole story. It's this complete contradiction. On one hand, Chávez took advantage of record-high oil prices to fund these huge social programs, and look, they worked. Poverty and unemployment were literally cut in half. But, and this is a huge but, on the other hand, the very foundations of the economy were being hollowed out. He nationalized over 1,000 private companies, basically wiping out the country's ability to produce anything. He slapped on price controls that made it impossible for the few businesses left to turn a profit. So even in the middle of this historic oil boom, the government was building an economy that was just a house of cards, totally dependent on oil money. And just to give you a sense of the sheer amount of cash we're talking about, get this, 3 Marshall Plans. That is an insane amount of money. But it was all being poured into a system that was becoming fundamentally broken. So after Chávez dies from cancer in 2013, his handpicked successor, Nicolás Maduro, takes over, and he inherits this incredibly fragile economy, right as a perfect storm is about to hit. Let's just walk through this timeline because it all happened so fast. In 2014, the price of oil, the absolute lifeblood of the country, crashes. The government's already in debt, the private sector's been destroyed, so there's no safety net. Then, in 2015, the political pressure ramps up when the opposition wins control of the legislature. Backed into a corner with no other options, the government makes a fateful decision. It just starts printing money to pay its bills, and that lit the fuse on a hyperinflation bomb. The result? Absolute chaos. The new money was worthless, wiping out savings. And to pay its debts, the government had to slash imports by over 70%. Now remember, because they'd gotten rid of domestic production, the country needed those imports for basically everything. This is what directly led to those empty shelves we saw earlier. No imports meant no food. As the entire country started to crumble, the Maduro regime's focus shifted. It wasn't about governing anymore, it was about pure survival. It launched this systematic campaign to just consolidate power and crush any democratic obstacle in its way. And they did it step by step. First, they packed the Supreme Court with loyalists. Then they had that court strip the opposition-controlled National Assembly of all its power. They even created a whole new parallel legislature filled with government supporters. And to top it all off, in 2018, Maduro held a presidential election that was condemned around the world as a complete sham. Which brings up a really important question, right? With the economy in an absolute freefall, how did Maduro keep the military on his side? I mean, they're the ones with the guns. The answer? Well, it lies in a deep, dark web of corruption and crime. This is the Cartel de los Soles, the cartel of the suns. Now, this isn't your typical drug cartel. It's a network made up of the top brass, high-ranking military generals and government officials who are using their power to run a massive drug trafficking operation. The name? It comes from the little sun insignias on the generals' uniforms. So here's how it works. It's actually pretty simple. These military officials control the country's key infrastructure, the airports, the seaports, the borders. They use that control to help cartels and groups like the FARC move tons of cocaine out of Colombia, through Venezuela, and into the rest of the world. The bottom line is, the massive profits from this drug trade give the military leadership a very powerful reason to protect the Maduro regime at all costs. Their personal fortunes now depend on it. And all of this leads us to where Venezuela is today, a tragic stalemate. The country is completely fractured, paralyzed by a political standoff, crushed by international sanctions, and stuck in the middle of a geopolitical tug-of-war. This table really just lays out how bizarre the situation is. You have two men claiming to be president. On one side, you've got Nicolás Maduro. He has the actual power on the ground, the military, the police, the courts, and he's got powerful friends like Russia, China, and Cuba. On the other side, you had the opposition leader, Juan Guaidó, who was recognized by the US and dozens of other countries as the legitimate president. His power was mostly symbolic, though he did control some of Venezuela's assets overseas. In response to all this, the United States led a maximum pressure campaign. It imposed crippling sanctions, especially targeting the oil industry. And while those sanctions have absolutely devastated what was left of the economy, they haven't achieved their main goal. They haven't forced Maduro from power. And so we're left with this final, incredibly difficult question. For a nation that has lost so much, trapped between a criminalized regime and overwhelming international pressure, what does the path forward even look like? Is a peaceful solution still possible? That remains the tragic, uncertain heart of the Venezuelan crisis.